greatest positive force in the Middle East right now? What would help the region most in economic terms at the present time?
Stability would be a much needed factor in developing economic choices and capabilities in our part of the world, as it is anywhere. But as I mentioned in my presentation, because of the existing situation of vacuums and failed states, that stability is not yet available. And so if we can work together to achieve the kind of stability that is needed to allow people to progress, to allow them to initiate businesses, engage with others in trade and education and so on, that would be a wonderful remedy for the ills that we face in our part of the world.
Our next question is from Mary Broad. Does Saudi Arabia fear any of its neighbors might purchase nuclear weapons from North Korea or anywhere else?
The kingdom's main concern about nuclear weapons is that they should not proliferate. And that is why it has supported all of the measures in the international community to prevent proliferation, including the establishment of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, to extend from Iran all the way across to the Atlantic, the country of Mauritania. And in order to achieve that, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Organization has held 2 sessions in 2010 and 2015 in which this issue of the zone free of weapons of mass destruction was discussed. Unfortunately, there has been no agreement on establishing this zone. In my view, this is the only way that we can prevent nuclear proliferation. And my main criticism of the nuclear deal that was done with Iran recently is that it allows for proliferation, because it allows Iran to continue to enrich uranium. And by doing that, the rest of the world has then the right also to enrich uranium. And therefore, by doing that, we see that if Iran 15 years from now, the end of this agreement, then decides to go the way of developing nuclear weapons, the rest of the world will equally have the obligation, if you like, to copy Iran and to do that. And so, putting an end to nuclear proliferation by establishing a zone free of weapons of mass destruction would be the surest way of preventing that from happening.
And so, at the end of 10 to 15 years, would the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia consider building its own nuclear weapons to counter Iran?
I have publicly said 5 years ago that we should consider all options. It is not only to our present interests, but it is for the future generations. I'm not going to be around here 15 years from now, except if I'm like that gentleman who was 107 years old. But my children and my grandchildren are going to be. And so if they have to face more exposure to nuclear weapons, I think they should consider all options. Now, how Saudi Arabia can do that, I'm not an expert enough to be able to say. But we should consider it and study what available options are. It may be an option of alliance, it may be an option of a nuclear umbrella from a friendly ally like the United States, or some other such options. But we should consider all of these options, including the acquisition of nuclear weapons.
I'm being handed questions by the second here. I'll ask a question from one of our guests tonight, Tom Erspamer. Tom, how about if you ask the question yourself?
There's a narrative circulating in the popular press that Saudi Arabia promotes dangerous Wahhabism. Can you enlighten us with a counter-narrative this evening?
Well, you know, this issue of Wahhabism exists mainly in the minds of Western press and so-called experts on the Middle East. If you come to Saudi Arabia and you ask people there, and you ask what is Wahhabism, they'll tell you we don't know, because it is a canard that has been thrown at Saudi Arabia for obvious reasons, to try to blame Saudi Arabia for much of what is happening in the Muslim world. In the 18th century, in the middle of the 18th century, a Unitarian reformer in the middle of Arabia began preaching his Unitarian ideology to the rest of the community. And his name was Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. And he allied himself with another gentleman who was from the middle of Arabia called Muhammad ibn Saud. And both of them spread that preaching of Unitarianism, very similar to the Unitarians in your country here, belief in one God and good practice to human beings and education and all of that, enlightening and other improvements on the social order at that time in the mid-18th century in Arabia. But because the Ottomans at the time had ruled in Arabia for a couple of centuries and saw this preaching as being dangerous to their peace and quiet, they are the first ones who issued that canard by calling this preaching Wahhabism and describing it as a heretical religious movement that should be countered. And they did. They countered it, and they sent armies from Syria, from Iraq, from Egypt, that finally put it down in the 19th century. But the idea stuck, because it's a very simple idea. If you believe in God, then you should follow the dictates of God, and you should practice the dictates of God as they were brought down in the Holy Quran and the sayings of the Prophet. And basically that is what the people who are now accused of being Wahhabis have been preaching since the 18th century.
Ken Peterson, where are you?
This is a bit of a long one, so I apologize up front. Can you comment on the various programs and commitments of the kingdom to diversify its economy away from petroleum production, to reduce the social turmoil, economic chaos, and religious extremism, which looms large when alternative energy eclipses carbon-based energy resources in the decades to come? Does political stability in the region require nothing less?
The kingdoms.
That'll make the rest of your evening, so.
If you will let me, I will do that. The kingdom has initiated what is called Vision 2030, which is a social and economic reform program that has certain principles to ensure that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia can increase the sources of income other than petroleum to its treasury. One, of course, is reform in government by streamlining the bureaucracy and making sure that the projects undertaken by the government are implemented to the best standards possible. The second reform, of course, is the empowerment of women in the economy. And that is done by not only education, but also opportunities for financing and for engaging with our women's population. The statistics that I saw is that in the total labor force in Saudi Arabia, women make up somewhere between 7 and 9% only of the labor force. Vision 2030 would like to increase that percentage by 2030 to at least 35%. So that's a big jump in drawing our women into the labor force. But also the other aspect of Vision 2030 is to develop the alternative sources of income, because Arabia has a vast panoply of mineral resources and undiscovered treasures that hopefully we can make use of. And the most treasured element and contributor to Saudi Arabia's future is its young people. And there is a vast program for developing our young people's resources. 70% of Saudi Arabia's population is under the age of 35. And that is, some of them are sitting around here. They have been given scholarships to study in this country and in other countries. In total, today there are nearly 150,000 Saudi students, both men and women, studying all over the world to acquire the skills and know-how that will hopefully bring implementation to this Vision 2030. And so this is very briefly what Vision 2030 hopes to do vis-a-vis Saudi Arabia's ability to meet the challenges of the future.
Could I ask all the Saudi students that are here today or former recipients of King's Scholars to stand for a moment just to be recognized? Don't be shy, come on. I'm going to try to combine three questions together because they're sort of all interrelated. One, unsigned. Would you favor reducing tensions between Sunni and Shia? If so, how would you start? If not, why not? Second question is from Ali Shakeri from the Olive Tree Initiative, wondering how we can incorporate Iran into discussions about peace in the Gulf. And the third is from our past chairman, Fred Amiri.
Well, Your Highness, to qualify my question, 38 years ago, I was under house arrest for a year and a half before I could come back to my two little kids and my wife here in this country. So I don't have any love for the government of Iran. But my question is, not only to you, but also to my dear, dear friend, our chairman of the Congress's Foreign Affairs Committee. Why are we worried about 15 years from now on, where there is a possibility of Iran developing a nuclear weapon, rather than concentrating on North Korea, which every single day have another missile that goes further? Is North Korea more of a danger to the United States of America than Iran or Saudi Arabia in 15 years? This is all politics. And I don't have love for that government. But this is all pure politics.
Thank you very much. North Korea does pose a danger, and I would agree with you that you need to deal with that danger yesterday, not tomorrow. But looking at things from my perspective, I still have to consider that the danger of Iran 15 years from now is, as I mentioned earlier, a threat to the well-being of my neighborhood in there. So while agreeing with you that North Korea should be dealt with now, I have to consider what I have to face 15 years from now. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we still have our hands extended to Iran. We would like to have Iran as a partner for stability and security in our part of the world. But they keep instigating the opposite. And so if they stop instigating the insecurity and instability, then we can work together with them in bringing harmony and peaceful coexistence with both of us. What were the other questions you had?
Sunni versus Shia.
No, Sunnah versus Shia. That is a purely political issue. Sunnah versus Shia have lived with each other for 1400 years. And sometimes they have conflicts, sometimes not. But when I was growing up, nobody mentioned Sunnah and Shia. In my country, we have a minority of Shia, and they're living there. Some of them have complaints. Some of them are being stirred up by Iran, unfortunately. And what I mentioned also in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Bahrain, and so on, for political purposes, some of the Shia community are being encouraged to undermine and sabotage the stability of the countries where they live. But the vast majority of the Shia are peaceful people, including in Iran. I read today in the press that there are some problems in Tehran because some of the workers had not received their wages recently, and they're demonstrating in front of the parliament. If that could be looked at as a priority, instead of sending revolutionary guards to Syria to kill Syrians, or to encourage the Shia militias in Iraq to kill their fellow Sunnis in Iraq, that would bring stability and peace in the area. And the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in 2012 had a summit meeting in the holy city of Mecca called by the late King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia for the specific purpose of encouraging dialogue between Sunnah and Shia. And they set up a dialogue center in the city of Medina in Saudi Arabia to do that. Invitations have gone out to clerics from both Sunnah and Shia to come to the center. So far, unfortunately, nobody from Iran has come forward. But as I mentioned, the hands are outstretched, and hopefully they will take them up.
You've been very generous with your time.
Not at all.
I appreciate it. If you don't mind, I'm going to finish with two last questions, and then I'm going to let you go. Dr. Harris Sahota wants to know about the Ummah. Is there any chance of having unity within all the countries within Islam? And Meredith Betancourt wants to know, what is Saudi government doing to relieve the refugee crisis in Syria?
Well, I answered that question about Syria in my presentation. In addition to the 2.5 million Syrians who have come to Saudi Arabia since 2011, the Kingdom has been providing financial and other support to the Syrian refugee camps in Jordan, in Turkey, in Lebanon, and to the United Nations refugee organization that helps the Syrians in their plight. So this is what Saudi Arabia is doing. As far as the other question was...
Unity among Islamic countries.
That is, how can I put it? That is a dream that is, devoutly to be pursued, as Shakespeare would say. But unfortunately, I don't think it is attainable in our present circumstances, where we see, unfortunately, and this is something we must admit to ourselves as Muslims, we have to put our house in order. And unfortunately, we're not doing that. We have, fighting between us, whether it is in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in other places. And if you look at the belt of poverty and disease throughout Africa and some parts of Asia, in many communities, it is in Muslim communities. So that is what we have to concentrate on, is eliminating these deficiencies that we have in ourselves. And that can only come from ourselves. We cannot expect that from the world community. We cannot expect that from the United States or from Russia or from Europe or so on. It has to come from Muslims themselves. And therefore, the dream of a united Ummah, as I mentioned, is a dream devoutly to be pursued, but it's not going to be attainable in my lifetime. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You've been very good.
Around the world, particularly in the Middle East. Suzanne Vaj, who is our co-chair of programs, is with me, and I think we should thank her and her organization. Syed Mujtahid, close enough. Thank you very much for bringing Prince Turki here as our guest speaker, and so thank you very much for that opportunity. We did want to recognize our corporate sponsor, R&D Medical. Dave and Veronica Sheraton are here at the head table. I want to recognize we have a tradition here for our guest speakers, and you're one of our very special guest speakers. So we give a token of appreciation that you can remember us. So, you know, what do you give a prince? But I, you know, somebody asked me that years ago, and it was a very prominent individual. If I said this person's name, you would all say, "Oh yeah." And they said, what can his grandchildren give him? And I said, whatever they gave him, give him. Because with love, he'll appreciate it. Yes. And so, Suzanne Vaj is going to present the first gift. Suzanne, present it to.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is very nice. Thank you very much.
Okay, see. The Prince mentioned this is his first occasion here in Orange County.
Yes.
So we thought we'd take back the book to remember our county as it once was and perhaps as it now is. So we have a book here, The Historic Photos of Orange County. So. Now, this was my idea, and Prince, you have to understand, at the time the Dodgers were up, the baseball team, the Dodgers were up, and I thought, I'm talking to some people, I'm not really a baseball guy, more football and basketball, but they said, I think the Dodgers could do it. They could go to the World Series. And I said, well, who's at the World Series, who for the Dodgers is the key guy? And they go, it's the pitcher. It's like the quarterback, it's the pitcher. And they said, well, I said, well, this is something he'll remember or he'll visit to. And I thought, well, who's the pitcher? And they said, well, Kershaw. It's not a mistake.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to start learning how to play this. And also, Orange County, I said earlier at dinner, I walked out today and had about an hour of walk. And I told some of my Saudi colleagues here, enjoy yourselves while you're here, because this is the nearest you're going to get to heaven.
One more thing, ladies and gentlemen. Mayor Steve Choi, of soon-to-be Assemblyman Steve Choi, from Irvine, would like to present recognition to His Royal Highness.
Highness Prince Turki Al-Faisal, thank you so much for updating the complicated issues of the world, particularly in the region. I'm the mayor of city of Irvine. Just in case if you don't know, you may learn a few things. So we are the safest city in America for 12 straight years. So we know how to keep our city safe, and also we know how to live in peace and harmony among 75 different ethnic different groups. So in an appreciation of for your presentation to the World Affairs Council of Orange County, I'm happy to present certificate of recognition signed by Stephen Choi, Mayor, City of Irvine. By the way, I am imported mayor from South Korea, not North Korea. Good.
Thank you to the Prince. Thank you to everyone who made this occasion happen. And thank you to everybody.
I'm so pleased to have Mr. Khatibi here. What was your take of the talk, the Prince talk?
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Barucci, for being here and covering our talk. This evening we had Prince Al-Faisal Turki from the House of Saud with us this evening, and his discussions arrayed from everything of Saudi Arabia's place in the world, as well as human rights, women's rights especially, that was a concern for us here in the United States, and his role on the issues going on with Iran, Lebanon, and the Syrian refugees. So he discussed a whole wider range of topics for a good 1 hour. We discussed everything from Iran to the Syrian refugees to women and human rights, and of course current affairs politics. It was very interesting to learn from Prince Saud his beliefs on where Saudi Arabia lies within the Middle East as being a powerhouse. There were many issues that we did not agree upon, but it is always wonderful and enlightening to listen from various leaders around the world and their thought process for their communities.
He seems to me a kind of moderate person since
Yes.
in Saudi Arabia, and he mentioned a few times that they have a friendly hand toward Iran, and they're trying to see if Iran can change policies. What was your take on that?
Well, he is very moderate, but when it comes to women's rights, I'm not sure how moderate he is.
Moderate in terms of the policy.
That's true. So yes, he was very moderate in that sense. He does believe that Iran is a huge concern for the Middle East, with them having access to nuclear energy and nuclear capabilities. And he is working very strongly with the U.S. and other countries in the world to see how they can come up with a better agreement with Iran and nuclear enrichment containment.
Did you find him optimistic about the Iran and Saudi Arabia future relationship?
He was slightly hopeful, I will say.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This program is coming to you from OCTV in Orange County, and hopefully in the future we're going to have this type of program for you more often.